Egyptian Sacred Sciences and Cosmology. The dream of Thutmose IV and his subsequent descent to the throne of Egypt is recorded on the stele he erected between the paws of the Sphinx during Dynasty 18, circa 1570 to 1360 BCE. Some of the narrative details described here may not be wholly authentic. Of the dozens of texts that repeat the narrative, each conveys a unique perspective with similar interpretations of related facts, philosophical musings, and imagination. Thutmose's story has been described as a quaint folktale, detailed as a historical record in royal chronologies, and even cited as a brilliant political fraud intended to advance the prestige of Thutmose. Even though the Sphinx story was mainly considered an example of the religious superstitions that prevailed in the New Kingdom, there is no consensus today regarding the monumental inscription's veracity or meaning. Scholarly and popular works discuss these and other historical events involving Egyptian kings, queens, priests, and peasants. As with Thutmose's story, they are repeated in several ways, some supporting and some discounting specific points of view. Another fresh perspective may shed light on a profound mystery that still needs to be discovered. Over the past century, we have attempted to understand the connection we all seem to have with sacred places. Like Thutmose and his dream, we also perceive a profound force in the ancient images, though they are not immediately apparent. Consequently, ancient Egypt's legacy left humans prolific writings, a rich and diverse artistic tradition, and an architecture that eludes modern replication continues to beckon to our curiosity and understanding. Many of their relics confirm that this was also the case with the ancient Egyptians.
Hi, I'm Mike McPherson, and you are listening to the Egyptian Origins podcast series. This week, Arthur is going deep into the sacred science and the cosmology of ancient Egypt. There is a growing belief that modern spirituality lacks the passion, devotion, and reflection caused by the oldest religions. These religions have intertwined mind, body, and soul with mythic themes throughout history. The Egyptian temple exhibited this by enfolding its constituents in grand celebrations, accompanied by time-honored liturgy, music, and ritual. The mythology of the Neteru and their powers within the sanctuary provides a model of behavior and experience for every stage of life and every profession or station.
We find no perplexity regarding human experience in the antiquities inherited from them. The result is an absence of spiritual conflict due to occasional social disruptions and immense passion for living, leading to achievements we have not yet reached. Thutmose's stele conveys an attitude of deep devotion, mingled with a sense of honor and dignity. It is difficult not to recognize that we lack or have forgotten this approach to existence, or dispelled it for the more significant concerns of modern civilization. By doing so, we are constantly reminded that many questions remain unanswered. Our limited understanding of Egypt's ancient wisdom has been severely limited by the prevailing opinion regarding its antiquity, not to mention the barriers created by our language, religion, and culture. It has been ascribed to Egyptologists that dynasties began around 4000 BCE. This is primarily a result of what is known about geology, history, and hieroglyphics in the 19th century of our era. It has been constantly altered over time, but there are still serious disagreements about the exact number. Technology, which provides data on the cultivation of grain in the Nile Valley and the carving of the Sphinx, further complicates the matter, placing such events in a much older period, a period from 7,000 to 15,000 BCE. It was believed by the Egyptians themselves that their country had been founded by demigods from the very beginning of eternal time. Several thousand years of demigods ruled, and then were succeeded by dynastic kings we now know as Thieves. According to Herodotus, 440 BCE, 17,000 years had passed since the reign of the last demigod of Egypt. At that time, Heliopolis was considered the Egyptians' most highly regarded repository of arcane wisdom. Ptolemy II, Philadelphia's successor, Manetho told in his History of Egypt that the first rulers of Egypt were the gods, who were followed by the dynasty of demigods, who ruled for 24,836 years. Bibliotheca Historica, an ancient Greek history book written by Diodorus Siculus, 60 BCE, notes that the priests of Egypt, summing up the time between the sun's reign and Alexander's descent in Asia, conclude that it is 23,000 years. Also, 36,525 years for the age of Egypt is given by Iamblichus, 250 to 330 CE, a writer on Egypt's secret tradition and many aspects of ancient mystery schools. As with other reports, these and other claims have been dismissed as impossible fabrications designed to increase the fame of their inventors. Egypt's civilization can be traced back to the time 300 years before and after the advent of modernity, though there is no agreement on its origins. Egypt's sequential conquest of Persia, Greece, and Rome ushered in the Greco-Roman period. During this period of Roman expansion, polytheistic religions predominated, monotheistic faiths emerged, Greek philosophy saw into science and technology, and diverse cultures coexisted in a tolerant atmosphere. Egypt was the oldest civilization in the Greco-Roman world. Throughout the ancient world, there were significant civil disturbances. Scholars, historians, and explorers flocked to the place to document its disappearance. They also saw the last breath of the unwavering devotion, unparalleled dignity, and extraordinary approach to existence that had lived in the memory of time. Despite its geographical and political isolation, Egypt also experienced a unique artistic synthesis that allowed the dissemination of Egyptian ideas previously inaccessible. Traditions of Hermeticism. Many sources, studies, and experiences provide reports and details of Egypt's esoteric tradition. Most of those who related the spiritual legacy of the pharaohs for posterity were outsiders, although some had enough intimacy with the Egyptian sages to relate some factual documentation. While pursuing knowledge of Egypt's famed religious mysteries, Herodotus discovered what he sought, but he deferred to reveal the details. Tens of thousands of men and women beat their breasts at the festival of Isis at Busiris, but I am not sure in whose honor. Plutarch was a philosopher, historian, and priest of Pythian Apollo in the Roman period, born near Delphi in Greece. He traveled throughout the civilized world to document the religious traditions of his time. He provided a detailed account of the mysteries of Egypt. There is one item that can be guaranteed. The religious rites and ceremonies of the Egyptians were never instituted on irrational grounds and were never built on mere fables and superstitions, but were instead founded to promote the morality and happiness of those who observed them, or at the very least to preserve the memory of some valuable event in history. or to demonstrate some natural phenomenon. An additional valuable source of Egyptian wisdom is the Corpus Hermeticum, Hermetic Body, a collection of writings from the Alexandrian sage schools, reputedly functioning during the Greco-Roman period. Alexander was the last and most significant conqueror of Egyptian territory over several thousands of years. Ptolemy Lagos, his favorite general, inherited the royal house of Egypt. The Greek historian Arrian wrote that Alexander founded the city on the Egyptian village Rekute in 331 BCE. Dianocrates of Rhodes designed the city. Ptolemaic rule saw a concerted effort to gather all the knowledge of the civilized world, with an estimated 700,000 volumes gathered at Alexandria. In this task, Manetho was one of the more well-known compilers. An extensive translation effort was also made into Greek, the language of the intellectual elite, in addition to the collection campaign. For this purpose, 2 legendary libraries were created: the Serapeion, in Latin Serapeum, adjacent to the Temple of Serapis, and the Mauseon, Museum. In Alexandria, the Ptolemaic royal court flourished for nearly 300 years. They promoted the fusion of Egyptian religion and philosophy, which they revered for their antiquity and depth, with Hellenistic ideas under the patronage of the renowned artists, scientists, and scholars of their time. Alexandria became the plexus of learning in Greek-speaking countries due to the centers and schools attached to the libraries. Following the Caesar's wars, the Romans annexed Egypt. Cleopatra VII, the last Ptolemaic monarch, failed to mobilize support against Augustus Caesar's army in 31 BCE. This event profoundly altered the landscape of Western philosophy and religion. After that, the newly conquered dispersed Alexandrian knowledge. As their empire expanded in the second half of the Greco-Roman period, they imported innovations from far-flung regions, the Far East, Western Europe, and rapidly growing Gnostic communities in the Middle East. Kemetic writings found in Alexandria's libraries were attributed collectively to Hermes, a Greek conception of the Egyptian deity Jehudi, patron of science, learning, and language. She was believed to have incarnated herself as a sage several times, and in the beginnings of Egyptian civilization, in the form of Hermes Trismegistos, also known as the thrice greatest, because he had perfected the 3 sacred disciplines of medicine, architecture, and astronomy. Egypt regarded Jehudi as the original teacher of sacred knowledge. His task was to write the secret books of the temples and possess the magical words of power used in temple rituals. He was known as Thos Hermes by the Greeks living in Egypt. Imhotep was revered as a patron saint of arcane teachings in the Old Kingdom. According to Egyptian legend, his architectural canons constructed the Saqqara and Giza monuments. The Greeks and Romans believed these complexes were temples of initiation into the highest mysteries of religion. The legend of Thos Hermes Trismegistus was thus born, with all the accompanying Hermetic attributes and historical lore derived from Greco-Roman culture. Although scholars attribute the text to Hermes, the Corpus Hermeticum is undoubtedly the work of many individuals, perhaps a school of philosopher-sages dedicated to the divine scribe they believed spoke through their writings. There are a series of dialogues, transmissions, between teachers and students. They describe cosmic life, humanity's role in the universe, and the soul's progress from earthly to heavenly realms. Aside from these philosophical dissertations, there are also treatises on astrology, magic, alchemy, and religious compositions. Hermes is a significant source of spiritual revelation throughout the text. The Dowager Hermes saw all things, understood what he saw, and had the power to explain what he understood. He inscribed on tablets and hid what he had inscribed, leaving the more prominent part untold for later ages to seek. The precise contents of the Corpus Hermeticism have been the subject of much controversy among Hermetic scholars. Scholars have agreed that scribes serving the philosophic priest schools contributed the essence of cultural wisdom circulated throughout the developed world during the Greco-Roman age to the Alexandrian libraries. The extant esoteric tradition of Egypt was undoubtedly part of this and notable contemporaneous Greek, Roman, and Persian spiritual works. The Alexandrian school of philosophy of the time produced 17 genuine Hermetic texts. Scholars migrating to Egypt studied the collection in search of the legendary ancient wisdom it contained. The Corpus Hermeticism was assembled during these events, perhaps intended as a series of summaries or comments on the fundamental elements of Egyptian esotericism. It was infused with Manichaeism, a dualism philosophy that became part of early Christian beliefs. In the centuries that followed its compilation, the Hermetic philosophy may be the only vital remnant of the ancient world that has survived significant political and religious power shifts in the Middle East and Europe. Egypt was considered the ultimate repository of the civilized world's spiritual traditions until the Arab conquest, 640 CE. Legend says that the ancient mysteries were entering a latent phase during this time. Because of this, the library of classical knowledge continued to accumulate in Alexandria until a series of fires imposed by Christian rule under Emperor Theodosius threatened its survival. As a result of an alleged restoration of over 300,000 manuscripts, the Arab conquest under Caliph Omar dismantled the literary collections and reduced them to legend in the Dark Ages. During the Middle Ages, scholars of all religious faiths used the Corpus Hermeticism to gain and reproduce copies of ancient works for their study and the collections of their patrons. These were the eclectic fragments of low magic, Greco-Roman religion, ancient folklore that survived, and authentic Hermetica. Various translations exist, including Christian, Jewish, and Islamic versions that are all similar in content and variously influenced by their translators. There was thus a confusion between the arcane wisdom and remnants of an already decaying culture, devoid of its once revered spiritual or moral mandates. The Egyptian esoteric tradition was introduced to the world of late medieval Europe by the Italian philosopher Marsilio Ficino in the 15th century, who translated Platonic and Hermetic works from Greek and Latin alongside their commentaries. The Dominican priest Giordano Bruno left the church at the time the Italian Renaissance was at its height to study Egyptological magia and to disseminate Platonic and Hermetic literature in Oxford, Prague, Frankfurt, and Venice. He was later detained by the Inquisition and burnt at the stake in Rome for heresy. The scholars who followed Ficino and Bruno not only understood the material they were heir to, but they also articulated it well enough from its original perspective to significantly influence the minds that eventually led to the Enlightenment of the 18th century. Most of the Hermetic works are dialogues about the origin of natural and divine life. His students, Tat and Asclepius, discuss them with Hermes Trismegistos. One of the most renowned compositions of this genre is the divine Pymander's 14 Sermons. Spiritual forces. Their realms and access are conscious manifestations in human life. The Egyptian esoteric tradition is similar, though the means toward the end were different. Despite reflecting the principal worldview of ancient Egypt, the Hermetic writings can convey an erroneous theme of spiritual teaching. The Hermetic revelation was not a conscious act of a teacher imparting knowledge to a student. In its place, it was a process by which the candidate arrived at wisdom by taking the time to contemplate the natural world and learning its order. Several dialogues implied this process. Another sense in which the Hermetic writings were misunderstood is that candidates for the mysteries were selected for their spiritual aptitude, when in reality most were shallow aspirants caught up in the age's phantasmagoria. The politically and socially elite adapted esoteric teachings indiscriminately from Oriental esoteric traditions, rather than spiritually accomplished individuals. Therefore, the goal of the mystery religion, to free the soul from the bonds of carnal existence and temporal life, to find spiritual existence with eternal life, was undoubtedly overlooked by the chroniclers of time. Neophytes were ideally admitted into a particular religious tradition for their preliminary suitability for spiritual life. A mystery curriculum school offered an intensive curriculum for the adept in the next stage. Also, at the end of the process, the possibility of practicing the mysteries as a teacher was highlighted. A protocol guided the entire program by paying attention to moral aspiration and spiritual merit. Over time, the elitism resulting from political families' control excluded most people except the wealthy. Throughout the hundreds of books discussing Egyptian religion, we find references by authors to public adoration in cults of the divine by ordinary folk who possess simple ideas, as opposed to high initiates who have more elevated ideas. The ancient Egyptians did not distinguish between groups in their society based on their spiritual status. In the Greco-Roman world, the class became the primary difference between the initiated and the uninitiated, creating prejudices that impede our understanding of ancient religious life today. Numerous thinking styles from different cultures coexisted with Greco-Roman philosophy in the Hermetic works. These systems of thought impose a set of contradictory ideas. It is consistent with Egyptian cosmology that certain portions of the corpus refer to a threefold division of life, from the material to the cosmic levels. The works also refer to scales of 7 worlds and 10 realms of universal manifestation, which reflect Greek and Kabbalistic concepts. Egyptian esoteric traditions have influenced parts of Corpus Hermeticum. However, its major components are derived from Greco-Roman thinking, such as the Hermetic spiritual goal. The process of spiritual transformation is believed to be primarily influenced by external agencies, such as teachers, tests, and trials. Egypt's esoteric tradition requires an inward initiation experience, awakening powers through progressive contact with nature. This can be achieved by exercising internal senses and forces rather than external means. The self-initiation process was also woven into natural cycles as sacred astronomy. As expressed in many hymns and spells in sacred literature, Judy is called he who is self-created. Devas themselves were believed to have entered the phenomenal world through progressive stages of self-knowledge. It is not the transposition of Greek and Roman images of philosophical and mythological imagery that defines the Hermetic tradition. It also relies on a mode of thinking that is not purely Egyptian in spirit and must be redefined. It is noteworthy that the Greco-Roman mystery tradition emphasizes wisdom gained from a master, or hierarchy of masters, who gave the candidate access to the cosmic world. As described by high priests, priestesses, and royalty in their life summaries associated with temples and tombs, spiritual awakening among the ancient Egyptians began with mastery of self, becoming a master of secrets. This is the first act of initiating in the Egyptian system, but the initiate has already completed one mandate of the temple. This process is deeply personal because the actual spiritual powers of the Hermetic universe reside inside the individual. In later centuries, the sages of Alexandria and the early Middle Ages were followed by a metaphysical confidence of the Templars, Kabbalists, Rosicrucians, Freemasons, and the spiritualists in modern times. The spiritualists, theosophists, and New Age questioners, each expounded on some aspect of Egypt's sacred wisdom, but each seems to have appropriated what was appropriate for their ideologies or simply available at the time. The sacred science. Archaeology is a science that is barely over a century old. Many professionals have struggled with reconciling ancient Egyptian data with biblical history and Darwinian theory, until recently, since it has largely been enshrouded in the conventions of the method. A few independent approaches have emerged in modern times, combining archaeology, anthropology, and archaeoastronomy to explain some of the unsolved ancient mysteries. Influences outside of human civilization have inspired ancient Egypt's legendary esoteric tradition. As a result of the scholarly approaches, speculative theories have been proposed that place the answer far from the Egyptians' realm. Over the past few decades, several speculative theories have been advanced, such as intergalactic spaceships and secret political hierarchies from mythical Atlantis. These theories have provided us with a closer understanding of the ancient legacy. Throughout time, the esoteric tradition has referred to an alternative interpretation that offers tremendous insight into the situation. But academia has discounted this interpretation for obvious reasons that we will examine later. The esoteric tradition was studied by the Alsatian mathematician, philosopher, and Orientalist René Schwala de Lubitz, a scholar whose views planned a symbolist interpretation of Egypt's legacy, a term borrowed from the intellectual and artistic movements of the late 19th century, which rejected academic and realistic modes of representation. De Lubick's ideas initially met with critical derision and rejection, but have been gradually incorporated into mainstream Egyptology, nearly as if they had been a part of it from the start. It has only been recently that his work became accessible to English-speaking students who spent a significant part of their lives in Egypt. De Lubick's symbolic approach departs from the orthodox perspective of early Egyptology that regarded Egypt's spiritual framework as a crude precursor to Western monotheism. Egyptian chronology is accepted as a legitimate record, even though written in arcane language. Then the evidence of ancient historians is analyzed in the symbolic language of those who lived in Egypt for the last 4,000 years: art, architecture, literature, and science. These are neither subjective nor speculation, but a kind of integrated interpretation that considers what we are learning about ancient disciplines in cosmology, physics, anthropology, and genetics. A symbol is a sign that one must learn to read, and a symbol is a writer whose laws one must learn. A narrow interpretation of ancient philosophy, science, and religion was the source of much confusion until recently. In dispelling a narrow, literal interpretation of Egypt's legacy, this groundbreaking work is one precursor of a modern Egyptological renaissance. By learning from de Lubac and other modern scholars, we can gain the empowerment of knowing that humanity possesses the wisdom to build monuments that last for millennia, and the insight to coexist harmoniously with the natural environment. Considering this possibility seriously might revolutionize education, science, religion, and philosophy in our time. This prospect can be realized only through the rediscovery of what symbolists call the sacred science, a body of knowledge from which all Egypt's endeavors emerged. The exhaustive research that de Lubac conducted on temples, literature, and art revealed that the use of such science was an attempt to apply the most profound spiritual wisdom to human life. The Egyptians did this using what we would today call magic, a natural transformation technology. Furthermore, de Lubac hypothesized that this knowledge is immensely archaic, possibly predating Egyptian civilization itself, and that is a discipline that combines science, the arts, religion, and philosophy. Most conservative scholars object to interpretations of ancient Egypt because we all have fundamental religious prejudices that we cannot recognize when examining other cultures. In the West, creeds are dominated by a materialistic, monotheistic interpretation of the world. The book argues for a polytheistic, metaphysical approach, necessary to understand the ancient Egyptian world, which had countless divine powers interacting on diverse planes of manifestation. The Egyptians used much symbolism in their art, architecture, writing, and science, often confusing students. In addition to its literal definition, artistically and linguistically, the symbolist view emphasizes the symbol as the expression of divine principles at work in the mundane realm. The symbol represents more than an idea in Egyptian thinking. It represents a state of being. A critical feature of their symbol use is that every condition, concept, or element in nature has a corollary. Ancient Egyptians excelled at communicating ideas intertwined with nature's rhythm, plants, animals, and even human life. They did this brilliantly through hieroglyphic writing. Compared to other kinds of writing, hieroglyphic writing displays no natural evolution. However, it evolved through time until three distinctive forms emerged: hieroglyphic, composed of signs; hieratic, a cursive form of hieroglyphic; and daemonic, a late vernacular also in cursive form. Three archaic and recurrent hieroglyphic signs illustrate how Egyptian symbols convey concrete and abstract ideas. The three all represent a specific aspect of universal protection. The three share common symbols, but each uniquely uses them. Universally, the dream represents unity, or an eternal principle in motion. Commonly, horizontal lines refer to a plane of reality, or to sequential, linear phenomena, such as time measurement. A vertical line indicates an energetic principle of ascending or descending. In Egyptian symbolism, these ideas have been expressed in the arts and sciences since time immemorial, but have been linked to forms found in nature. It has been suggested that the Sa, Ankh, and Shen are composites of circles and lines joined by woven ropes, a metaphor for the act of knotting or drawing together multiple states of being. In establishing an action or establishing a place, Sa represents divine protection. Some ancient Egypt's earliest tomb inscriptions depict Sa symbols involved in everyday activities, which are derived from floating devices used on Nile vessels to protect boatmen from drowning. The symbol is used in written form to show protection by using the universal force that binds all things together. A protective coil forms when the cosmic cord fastens the horizontal plane of reality. Several divinities are shown holding the Sa as a scepter or as a marker. The Sa is often shown at the bottom of the pole to symbolize the mooring post or a stable point in the heavens. Many versions of Ankh, which means life, include speculation that it is a penis sheath or even a sandal strap. However, some scholars believe that it represents the fundamental connection to life that all living beings have from the beginning, the umbiculus. In written form, the Ankh represents protection, vitalization, and renewal. In pictorial inscriptions, it illustrates how life originates from the divine and is transmitted from one form to another. A horizontal bar with wound rope connects a loop and its tail to the most ancient inscriptions of the Ankh, illustrating the descent of an eternal principle onto the physical plane. Shen is symbolic of protecting life by isolating and defining what surrounds it, symbolizing the unbroken circuit of natural forces. A circle is connected to the plane of reality by a cosmic thread. As a cartouche, the Shen surrounds the written name of a royal person, symbolically strengthening them to continue. We are connected to the universe, each other, and natural forces through Sa, Ankh, and Shen. From this perspective, as expressed in their writing, Egypt's religious and philosophical mysteries seem less destructive, since literal translations cannot convey such ideas. For instance, in the case of the combination of human and animal images as spiritual ideas, a fascinating world of metaphors is opened, rather than a perverted view of nature. While there are rules of context implicit in Egyptian, the symbolic nature of its words, signs, and levels of meaning has yet to be fully understood. Neteru symbolism. According to the Egyptian view of life, the human person is not separate from nature or spirit, but rather a co-creator and transmitter of divine principles. The concept of divinity is one of the most intriguing aspects of ancient Egyptian religion. Neteru is the spiritual beings from whom life originates in Egyptian religious writings. The word is traditionally translated as the gods, with Neber representing the deity of a place or event. The T in the word is pronounced as a soft ch. Since the deciphering of hieroglyphics in the 19th century, Neter has always been understood in this sense. Egypt's elaborate cosmological system, incorporating gods, goddesses, animal totems, and celestial asterisms, has been proposed as the language of sacred science. Each composite figure represents a realm of action, experience, and idea, incorporating principles and functions. Nature can also mean force or power in an abstract sense. In essence, it refers to the concept of a high being, or God as we understand it, but not as an entity elevated above human existence. According to the Egyptians, the Neteru permeates human life and nature, and in our experience, they are the divine aspect of people, places, and things. All things are bound together by the sacredness of the Neteru, which does not separate us from them. In other words, the Neter is not the progenitor of power, but its exponent. The Necher also distinguishes living matter from the unconscious. The Necheru were believed to have emerged from a primordial substance called pot, regardless of the time or place. There are times when the Necheru are collectively called the poti, the many of the pot. The original matter of which the Necheru are entirely composed gives rise to consciousness and is found in the physical world and human beings. By relinquishing physical life, the initiate becomes a part of the pot, literally or figuratively. The message of ancient Egypt is emphasized in the sacred science and expressed in today's literature, architecture, and monuments. The Necheru exists outside the physical universe in an ideal state, without form or impetus, a state that is akin to timeless perfection. Despite their divine realms, they still require their energetic nature to live and achieve. Hieroglyphs convey an essential aspect of the Necher as understood by the Egyptians. Divine life unfolds in time and space to reveal itself. Necher is represented by a bolt or a bone wound with a lengthy strip of cloth. In some cases, the folded cloth appears to be a pennant, since it unfolds when it is upright. There is an innate bond between Neteru and physical reality. The sacred science is a set of practices and teachings to maintain this bond. It is based on a natural, pre-existing unity between the two realms, where only the material world is at odds. All phases of the natural world are acted out, reflected, and acted out by human and divine life as an energy dynamic. In this worldview, nature is the supreme model, and every concept draws on a natural element that expresses a spiritual reality in a concrete, obvious manner. It includes animals, plants, minerals, and seasons, and celestial phenomena. From this ancient worldview, we can deduce that humans' relationship with the divine was paramount, and human connection with nature was how this bond was manifested. According to the materialistic soul god mentality, the two, physical and non-physical, are merely separated, and the latter is usually subjugated. So it is impossible to explain any paranormal or spiritual phenomenon comprehensibly. Within the magnificent temples of learning of ancient Egypt, known today as the Houses of Life, ancient travelers reported that the program for new members was to fully develop and utilize each individual's faculties. The Corpus Hermeticum also mentions this. Fulfillment of the vital idea through initiation, the maintenance of the human-divine interface. Their program includes supracorporeal senses, as tradition, metaphysics, religion, and philosophy descend from Egypt. In our culture, cerebral activity is highly regarded, and this teaching places a minor focus on it. What evidence do we have that this tradition existed? Could the fanciful rumor of past centuries be nothing more than another persistent myth about Egypt? Scholars of antiquity acknowledged Egypt's mystery tradition and its influence on the religion and philosophies of their own cultures during the time overlapping ancient and modern times. Herodotus, Diodorus, and Plutarch have described inconsistent but enigmatic references to high-teaching contemporary cultures with Egyptian culture. According to them, the mystery traditions of their own cultures borrowed from or copied Egyptian practices. A substantial amount of Egyptian literature supports this tradition. A complete system of funerary and magical rites, inscriptions in temples and tombs, prompters' marks on ritual tracts, and plays with specified secret chambers demonstrate that living participants took part in the mysteries. The history of Egypt is filled with references to healers, magicians, philosophers, and the temple schools with which they were associated. Imhotep, the great architect and magician of Dynasty III, was regarded as a spiritual master after reaching the pinnacle of human achievement in the centuries to follow. These salient elements of ancient architecture point to the fact that this tradition had a specific locale of practice. An example is the presence of ventilation chambers in pyramids. In addition to being useless for the dead, perhaps they circulated air in chambers intended for the living, who occasionally inhabited them, though their specific reasons cannot be determined. Attempts by Egyptologists to explain this phenomenon and other anomalies in sacred architecture have failed. To date, we do not know their purpose and must remain speculative. Numerous temples such as Dendera, Edfu, and Abydos, built in vastly different periods, have underground crypts and roof chapels that present intriguing possibilities. The sites were used for ceremonies celebrating human life transitions and transformations. The Osirian, at the rear of the remarkable temple at Abydos in Upper Egypt, represents a subterranean, water-filled chamber that recreates Asar's resting place before his renewal. The chamber's purpose has provoked every kind of speculation in Egyptology, as it stands apart from all others as either a temple or a tomb. Behind the temple staircases at Dendera, crypts adorned with elaborately rendered, fantastic images of sky ascents and cosmic journeys contradict the idea they were intended to serve as janitorial storerooms, as some popular guidebooks suggest. In addition, at both Dendera and Edfu, the stairways lead to mysterious roof chapels that depict emanations from celestial asterisms that give physical beings new life. Speculation abounds with such tantalizing clues. How did this elaborate architecture scheme span so many centuries? How could a vast network of esoteric schools have escaped the scrutiny of ordinary minds for such an extended period, if indeed they existed? Apart from some popular explanations, such as the fact that temples, tombs, and pyramids were meeting places for secret societies or landing pads for spaceships, one plausible explanation is that they served an esoteric purpose that could be understood if the tools needed were available. It was not uncommon for antiquities historians to mention such a tradition with reverence, though they declared that it could only be understood by those who possessed the capacity to comprehend it. These references have led to some unusual, popular interpretations. Ancient Egypt was home to a vast federation of neophytes who learned from a hierarchy of mysterious sages. It is argued that political powers working through the royal house dispensed complete information to aspirants as a form of spiritual favoritism. Ancient authors described sacred traditions, but they did not reveal how they were conducted or acquired their positions. According to symbolist theory, these figures did not appear due to political expediency or priestly power struggles, but emerged naturally due to a society that expected, recognized, and depended on their functions. The temple's mysteries were regarded as the essence of fermentation of their time and collectivity, capable of revealing the spiritual criteria of their milieu according to a predetermined schedule. Developed at the mythological beginning of Egyptian civilization, this program was designed using intelligence and consciousness that did not react to the outer world, but worked in harmony and synchronicity with it. The natural transformation could be brought about using this tool, just as it does now. It required faculties unique to the Egyptian mind to understand this tradition. Egypt's mentality. According to de Lubic's, the communication bridge between the Netero and the human condition is the innate intelligence, which the Egyptians termed the sense of the heart. It does not refer to cerebral intelligence or intellect, both of which are acquired through physical conditioning and experience. Human life contains innate intelligence that is encoded in the imposed matter. It endures all transformations human life may undergo when awake or asleep, conscious or unconscious, alive or dead. This parallels the Egyptian concept that the consciousness originating from the primeval substance, Port, is the one that sustains sentience in human life. Egyptians believed that three qualities enabled innate intelligence to be awakened. We may employ these qualities to return to the vast wellspring of wisdom known as the sacred science. Parallelism. The course of nature was also regarded as the natural course of human life in Egypt. The Nile River rose and fell naturally, and the budding, fruition, and hibernation of plant life. Cyclical life was not regarded as a linear process with a beginning and an end. All events in any cycle were interpreted as natural transformations occurring on more than one level. Simultaneity was defined by psychologist Carl Jung's concept of synchronicity, a non-causal connecting force in the physical universe. There may not be a coincidence of simultaneous events connected by meaningful attributes. This implies that such occurrences are all rooted in the same underlying principle. By becoming unified or connected to this underlying principle, simultaneity, in the Egyptian view, makes it possible for human life to participate in the religious experience. Divine activity is considered timeless, continually taking place simultaneously as a physical activity, even though humans do not perceive it. The Neteru's experience and powers can be directly assessed upon crossing this sphere, since the inner or after lives share the same dimension. This is achieved through natural transformations. Also, if the device is used to harness or master it, there is no cessation of life or death. Instead, there is a continuation of the cycle on another level. The term refers to experience beyond the physical realm. Level can also be represented by plane or dimension. In Egyptian thinking, simultaneity is expressed through the tremendous Osirian mythos. Egypt's first regent, Asar, has been the father of the Egyptian race. In the myth, he was slain by his corrupt brother Set, and his body was restored and elevated as sovereign of the supernatural worlds through a series of magical acts embodied in Egyptian mysteries. The story depicts natural processes in a continuous flux of apparent life and death through many symbolic elements. Asar represents the active and passive germinal principle of cyclical growth and the undeclared latent phase of organic forms in agriculture. Through life, death, or any transformative experience, Osirian consciousness is continuous participation in the overall cycles of nature. Combinations. Ancient Egypt perceived every principle as well as its inverse or complementary aspect. Pairing applies to all ideas in the same way that balance and symmetry are sought in art. In philosophical religions, such as Zen Buddhism, ideas were not countered with opposite ideas. Concepts were understood in conjunction with their opposites. It was expressed in sacred images, such as the royal crown guardians, the vulture, Nekbet, and the cobra Wadjet. It also referred to geography, such as the Red Desert and black cultivated lands, the papyrus and lotus plants, and the valley and delta regions of the Nile. In the great Heru-Set mythos is the metaphor of pairing supremely expressed. On one level, Neteru, Heru, and Set represent absolute opposites in the physical universe: ascension and fixation, or moving skyward and moving earthward. The two divinities are depicted in myth as continuously at odds. As they contend for Egypt's throne, they magically destroy each other's possessions and engage in a cosmic battle that affects Egypt's lands and the skies. This phenomenon was represented by many deities merging with or combining their natures with others. Nupti, one of these deities, was both Heru and Set in one formation. It was a metaphor of Horian consciousness, resolving opposing forces and impulses through synthesis. These opposing forces are also implied in the Egyptian world order. Affiliation. Nothing is seen as separate or out of context to an Egyptian from everything else. Though all spheres of manifestation in nature, there is always a correspondence between each thing and another. In the traditional Hermetic philosophy, what is above is a premise based on associative thinking, as the ancient Egyptians used it and are believed to be the foundation for the transformation of energy and matter. According to the maxim, higher principles are embodied in their lower counterparts, no matter the specific causal force. Since all things in our world are mirror images of subtler worlds, there can be no ultimate good or evil. There can only be gradations of what is fundamentally a divine force, which manifests in the sky, earth, plants, animals, and humans. Jehudi, the nator of Egypt, is a metaphor for the association, as he bridges the physical and non-physical worlds. Transmitting the power of primordial sound, he is the translator par excellence. His responsibility is to ensure that the divine pattern is transmitted into the terrestrial world, used in language, architecture, and sacred rituals. In this way, he facilitates the association with divine principles. In addition, Jehudi inspires the cultivation of Hermetic consciousness, the understanding of the phenomenal world in light of its divine origin, and the multiple realms in which it exists. The three pathways to transformation. According to ancient chronicles, the superiority of Egyptian thinking and their perception of life resulted from this mentality of pairing, simultaneity, and association. Its top quality emphasizes the interconnectedness of all things, physical and non-physical, within the universe. Additionally, using these frames of reference makes it possible to awaken innate consciousness. Asar, Heru-Set, and Jehudi embody the three modes of Egyptian thinking and represent a unique paradigm for a spiritual experience in ancient Egypt. The ancient Egyptians clearly defined three paths for the soul's transformation in this model. In Egyptian history, the three paths were emphasized in cyclic intervals, with the emergence of specific religious images, temple rites, and royal icons distinct from those of other periods. They will continuously figure as the backdrops from which Egypt's legendary esoteric tradition is expressed. In Egypt, the earliest esoteric ideas almost exclusively used stellar symbolism. It was believed that Neteru was embodied celestial phenomena, that the deceased returned to the sky, and that heavenly forces lived in the stars, appearing and disappearing cyclically. Solar symbolism became predominant because the Netero participated in the diurnal journeying of the sun through night and day, while human beings experienced the manifestations of light and dark both in this life and the next. In addition, in late Egyptological history, lunar symbolism emerged as the path of transformation, with growth and hibernation becoming the symbols of spiritual experience. The Netar Jehudi, who embodies the stellar path, engenders associational thinking and awakening through his knowledge of cosmic resonance. Heru and his dark adversary, Set, the newborn nature of light, represents the solar. He awakens innate consciousness by pairing and resolving the principles of heavenly and earthly, light and dark. In addition, the lunar path is represented by Asar, who embodies simultaneity in natural life and awakening. Ancient Egypt clearly defined these three paths in its written and constructed vestiges, but today they are seen as contradictory, confusing approaches to understanding oneself and the universe by ancient man. An Egyptological view summarizes the confusion surrounding these spiritual paths this way. As new beliefs were continuously assimilated without the old being discarded, the beliefs of the New Kingdom times were a bizarre mix of ideas based on the association of the dead king with the sun god Re, the stars of the heavens, and Osiris of the underworld. From a symbolist perspective, these contradictory beliefs can be seen differently. These beliefs make perfect sense if we consider the celestial cycles that alternated when these beliefs were in vogue, such as the pole moving to a new star marker, and the equinox moving into a new constellation. Ancient people carefully observed their cosmic landscape, which dictated new paradigms when such changes occurred. Changing celestial images into unknown places spawned new mandates, while relegating the old ones to mythology's background. All historical periods are filled with the hieroglyphic language, sacred astronomy, and temple rituals, so the sacred science described by D. Lubbock's was not a static or slowly developing body of knowledge, but rather a system of ideas incorporated into a system as time passed by an arcane school of mages. In reality, Egypt's civilization made up an entire program predictable from a knowledge of natural phenomena that existed from the earliest times until its decline. As well as esoteric tradition, ancient chroniclers provided enigmatic testimony to those who actively practiced and taught this sacred science. People who had already arrived at D. Lubbock's described the full use of innate consciousness as the elite of the temple, who was what the Egyptians referred to as masters of secrets. These people were not segregated from society or the infrastructure of the Egyptian community. It is important to note that the temple hierarchy fully supported the practice of the sacred science and the temple's technological environment, which merged sacred art, architecture, and magical technology, deploying sacred astronomy and ritual. Furthermore, its end should facilitate and enhance human transformation in fulfilling the essential idea, the continuous existence of human-divine interaction. D. Lubbock's drew upon ancient traditions and interdisciplinary methods in his work. Even though sacred science has always been with us, he recognized that it had been classified in Aristotelian categories as history, science, mythology, and occultism. Studying each alone does not provide a complete picture of Egypt's achievements, but they paint an intriguing portrait of human possibility when studied together. Het Her is the lunar principle that houses and reflects the sun, born through her as Ihai, son of Heru. Het-Her manifests the rhythms of the lunar principle in three ways: in the sky, on the earth, and within the individual. It is typical of many sacred names of ancient Egypt that the phonetic form conveys the word sound. The determinatives show its context, and the composite form communicates a unified image that comprises both principle and function. The sacred texts. Egyptian sacred literature is often mentioned, but considering the nature of the writing, we would also consider the entire body of their works. Egyptian writings span a wide range of chronological periods. We have direct access to the Egyptian experience with these timeless examples of ancient life and death, which are insightful and mysterious, primarily because we lack a basic understanding of the Egyptian language. The ancient Egyptians called writing Medu Nader, or divine words. This art was attributed to the divine scribe Jehutio from the beginning of time, when Egypt came into being and the Nutero ascended to earth by enunciating their names. In response to this event, language and writing emerged to communicate the sacred principles embodied by divine beings and preserve cosmic order. Scribes' roles in religious and social endeavors were viewed as a sacred duty, enforcing time-honored conventions that never changed through the generations. Symbolizing sounds, words, and ideas, hieroglyphs are rarely consistent in their expression. Modern times have understood this, leading some to believe that there existed an exoteric or esoteric writing, but neither describes the situation. In the same manner that the Egyptians understood that the powers of the Nutero were expressed more readily through natural life forms than abstractly, hieroglyphic writing transmits spiritual ideas through mundane images. To comprehend the whole meaning of the Medu Nader, a mind employing the faculties of simultaneity, pairing, and association is required. 3 levels of notation are used in hieroglyphic orthography. First, hieroglyphs represent the individual or multiple, bilateral and trilateral, sounds. Together, they form words in the Egyptian language. Vowels can only be approximated in modern transliterations. Only consonants are known. Ancient Egyptians had words that sounded the same, but their meanings are specified in hieroglyphs that express another level of communication. Ideas. The number of these sign-called determinatives imparts the particular meaning, resulting in a term meaning vastly different from another sounding precisely the same. Hieroglyphic notation on the 3rd level indicates the word's symbolically ideographic context, choosing signs that convey peripheral meanings or the overall functions of the idea expressed. This visual, active representation of the idea leaves an immediate impression on the reader. Writings collectively called wisdom literature reveal a typically practical yet elevated philosophy throughout Egyptian history. The most prolific dates were directed towards young people during the Old Kingdom, imparting values such as loyalty, honesty, and industry through instructional maxims and moral stories. There is evidence that wisdom literature originated and was composed in the House of Life of the Temple through temporal distribution. The material was accessible to everyone and was the primary tool used in teaching scribal skills, such as writing, copying, and illustrating. The material was reproduced during several historical periods. Such an example appears in the instruction of Ptah-hotep, Dynasty 5, regarded as a high order of advice intended for the training of royalty and scribes. This and other genre writings aim to develop respect, honor, equity, and moral conduct in students. Consult both the ignorant and the wise. Do not be arrogant about your knowledge. There are no limits to art, and no artist can achieve perfection. Narratives were also used to convey moral standards, in addition to lists of precepts. Despite class distinctions, stories such as The Tale of the Eloquent Peasant, the tale of a simple peasant's persistent efforts to receive justice and compensation from an unjust landowner, promote a standard of integrity and social responsibility. There are also legends of magic and references to historical mages who healed the sick and raised the dead in early wisdom literature. Although similar texts were published later, they consistently present a unique Egyptian perspective. There is a pre-existing, all-pervading order and harmony in the universe, which can be expressed in human life as a canon of behavior that is calm and optimistic. To fulfill one's duties as a social being in an orderly manner. A cosmic balance of forces reflects the human experience, but conscious awareness and acceptance are the ultimate accomplishments. In principle, it corresponds to Maat, the netter of cosmic order, called by some the goddess of truth. The Egyptian concept of Maat is a perfect equilibrium, the original unadulterated arrangement. Human beings strive for it on individual and collective scales. Similarly, Maat also means the way or path, in the same sense that Eastern yoga represents regaining balance and harmony. Throughout the sacred precincts, temples displayed extensive inscriptions of recipes, liturgies, calendars, and chronologies of royal families and events, and all maintained the expectation of order in secular and religious life. As reported in older records, these writings were identified as coming from ancient times, underscoring the continuance of original ancient traditions on every level of spiritual endeavor. The monumental writings of ancient Egypt illustrate the importance of tradition and the personal affiliation of a royal person with it. In describing an ancestor's role as the creator of divine order, obelisks and temple pylons may transpose a pharaoh's image with a depiction of an ancestor. Egyptologists have labeled them usurpers of their predecessors' achievements because of this. The obelisk at Karnak, dedicated to Hatshepsut, states that our father ordered the setting up of obelisks in order to live forever. Your Majesty must continue to make obelisks for you. Ramses II appears in the Temple of Amun at Luxor, and the Ramesseum on the West Theban bank as the hero of the Battle of Kadesh, an event with symbolic significance in Egypt's view of the maintenance of Maat. Asar's son Heru avenged his father's murder by Set and re-established the throne of Egypt after a series of battles, symbolizing the cyclic vanquishing of evil. Many of these scenes appear on the pylons of much later Ptolemaic temples, with the central figure, Pharaoh, playing the same role, vanquishing evil. Such is the role of the ruler in Egypt, from the beginning of time through everyone on earth. At the Edfu Temple of Hera in Upper Egypt, the royal enactment of universal balance is also depicted. Temple inscriptions state that a sacred drama and accompanying festival were held annually to renew the temple's power. During the search for the slain consort, Heru took on the role of the king. Auset played the role of the mourning widow. Heru is portrayed as a crocodile and hippopotamus, harpooning Set in the temple's nearby sacred lake, which played a significant role in the play. As a result of defeating the adversary, Heru restores the ancient union between the two lands and receives the royal crowns of North and South. Carl Jung describes participation mystique as gaining insight into the symbolic tradition of the temple by watching public performances of mythic events. The enclosure is engraved on the temple's inner walls, the mystery play of Heru. The detailed scenes may not appear mysterious at first glance, but the inscriptions reveal an ancient literary tradition unique to Egypt that later spread to Greece and Rome. The audience may relate to the sacred context when the dramatic environment supports the spiritual principles portrayed. In these conditions, participants can be initiated into spiritual mysteries because the players are believed to be inhabited by divine beings and communicate with the audience through ritual drama. From the late period onward, magic and metaphysics books preponderate, as Greco-Roman practices were adapted to fit the temple tradition. Several eclectic collections of recipes, spells, incantations, and dream interpretations from the period were taken primarily from tombs. As compared with earlier sacred literature, these writings have a distinct quality. As the text is intended to be understood, the style is in the cookbook style, revealing a materialistic attitude and an irreverence toward the fundamentals of the Egyptian moral code. The mentality that encourages sacred science for higher ends has disappeared. Literature for initiation. According to ancient writers, Egyptian esotericism was shrouded in secrecy when exploring its sacred mysteries. How was an initiation experienced in Egypt? Our examination of the fundamentals of Egyptian thought provides some clues. Nature and human life coexist with the Neteru, and their powers can be observed through the mental faculties of simultaneity, pairing, and association. A symbol similar to this was used extensively in both art and architecture to create an environment conducive to using these faculties. Initiation also included rituals. Communication with the Neteru was to engender participation in Mat, or altogether. Through the timing and symbolism of sacred astronomy, these elements were used in determining the moment and location of divine manifestation, an essential element of re-establishing human and celestial bonds. Hence, initiation is closely linked to natural phenomena in Egyptian terms. Egypt's sacred literature consists of the most comprehensive collection of spiritual, mathematical, astronomical, medical, and magical writings ever created by civilization. However, when deliberate international efforts were made to examine them, some assumptions were first made that conflicted with the minds of Egyptians who invented them. In light of this, even the most minor prejudices contribute to the fact that we lack knowledge about sacred science, the field of ancient knowledge that might shed light on our past successes and prospects. Modern science rejects the idea that ancient technologies can be superior to our own. This is why a genuine prejudice exists. As well as this, much of the classic Egyptological literature condescends to the spiritual ideas of the ancients and promotes the view that Egypt's written legacy is nothing more than a collection of hyperbole and primitive superstitions. The description of the transformation of the body, the prolongation of life, and the interaction between the living and the dead are attributed exclusively to funerary notions promulgated by priestly cults to control a spellbound populace. Ancient Egyptian priests and sages possess a high level of sophisticated knowledge, as evidenced by ancient writings. The evidence of this can be seen in the construction of their sacred monuments, the use of a calendric system we inherited, and other technologies far ahead of those found in nearby cultures. It is mostly assumed that they have spiritual purposes and are only partially known. There are some extant writings whose use as funerary literature is doubted, despite their discovery in tombs. There are formulae for obvious, practical, everyday purposes, such as medical treatment, recipes for warding off disease and psychic attacks, and many hymns invoking the Neteru All, which can be found in temples. Various forms of spirituality are described in these works, from interacting with divine forces to visiting favored places or people on Earth, or in one of the many realms of sacred entities. The human world is also brought back into focus by discussing the acquisition of occult powers. The material is highly pragmatic in tenor and neither mundane nor funerary, despite religious imagery. This demonstrates that the ancients' initiatory tradition was consistently spoken of. Even though ancient historians consistently refer to this tradition, most modern scholars reject their reports of esoteric sciences existing in Egypt as unrealistic. It is also denied that ordinary people can achieve spiritual enlightenment, following the fundamentalist belief that only chosen individuals or groups can access divine favor and enlightenment. There is a valid reason for dismissing this argument. Genuine religious prejudice stemming from the intolerance fostered by monotheism. Further supporting this notion is the accepted, absurd biblical chronology, which placed the creation of the world at 4004 BCE. Nothing civilized or conscious could have occurred earlier in this worldview. In order to better understand Egypt's spiritual tradition, these prejudices must be abandoned. In this sense, all sacred writings of Egypt may be considered initiatory literature, as they convey elements of sacred science when viewed through the eyes of the Egyptian mind, as opposed to through the eyes of modern thought, which is heavily influenced by narrow, materialistic views. For the metaphysics of the Egyptian system to be explored in its purest form and to discover the genuine qualities of Egyptian thinking, it must be examined as thoroughly as possible. Today, sacred texts on cosmology, science, and funerary tradition enable this. In order to understand it from a different perspective, perhaps abandoning the popular hermeneutics of speculation and focusing instead on the direct physical evidence Egypt has left us in monuments and writings. The Egyptians' symbolist thinking tools will re-examine these vital sources. While a comprehensive task of this sort may never be completed, the legacy of Egypt that we so admire deserves an earnest attempt at understanding. As a result of our tendency to think monotheistically, the Egyptians left a maze of religious figures for us to study. They appear complex and contradictory at first glance. It is said that polytheism embraces all possibilities, while monotheism rejects them in favor of just one. Deities present the many possibilities of being and becoming on an archetypal level, as the Egyptians illustrated in their literature concerning human transformation. These divine figures represent a fully integrated cosmological scheme, representing a unique code for nature and reality. Understanding this scheme is the first step through the portal of initiation, as promised by the ancient sages. Traditions of Hermetic and Ceremonial Religion. Hermetic philosophy, which we study today, is incomplete, but sacred science remains a valuable remnant. Most of this remnant is based on the third component of Egyptian mentality, association. Analogies and signatures are sage's guide and make him a magus, writes Dr. Lubix in Verbe Nature. Despite Hermeticism's recognition as essentially Egyptian, it is strongly influenced by Platonic ideas derived from Egyptian cosmology. Plato's goal was a life of self-mastery. He believed that this would be achieved through acquiring knowledge, a process he called remembering. Like the primordial consciousness of the sacred science, Platonism views the original human condition as one of wisdom, which can be approached by harmonizing reason and passion. It also proposes the doctrine of forms, which posits that the phenomenal world descends from a realm of immaterial, unknowable principles. Like the Netero realm, this realm is only accessible through the forms in which these principles manifest themselves in the world of appearances, earthly life. Plotinus, a sage born in Lycopolis, Egypt, of Roman parents, was the philosopher who further articulated and interpreted Plato's philosophy in the 3rd century of our era. In his Aeneids, he combines his knowledge of Greco-Roman magic and metaphysics with the belief that the soul can return to its source through knowledge of the levels or emanations of the immaterial worlds. In Plotinus's day, these regions were incorporated into a complex system of demonology that reflected the famous images of religious belief. Due to its existence contemporaneous with the nascent Christian and Islamic faiths, Neoplatonism influenced the theologies of those religions before they became formally organized. It maintained philosophical connections with certain Egyptian concepts. Neoplatonic understanding of the soul's memory is an example of this, as is Egyptian tradition that the primeval source of all life, Paut, leaves an imprint on human consciousness. Thus, the foundations of Neoplatonism are based on an Egyptian worldview, but natural forces in the world rather than abstract ideas constitute spiritual life in the latter system. Egypt also adhered to a sky-centered worldview rather than an earthly one. Jehudi was also associated with celestial phenomena in Egyptian cosmology and became part of the chronocrator of divine cycles, meaning his cultus was charged with dispensing Hermetic knowledge. Therefore, understanding spiritual processes in the Hermetic system is based on an ancient tradition that knowledge of sacred astronomy, the appearance and movement of the planets and stars, is a prerequisite for gnosis. A third unique function is created by polarized figures or pairs in Egyptian symbolism, with a trinity of 3 and cosmic families. On the other hand, Hermetic teachings emphasize a septenary structure on all levels of natural life. The 7 classic planets represent the 7 planes of vibration in a universal order in that system. Their rays represent the significant scale of cosmic manifestation. It was believed that the Hermetic scale held the key to all organic life. At the threshold of Olympus circle 7 wandering stars, and forever time revolves among them. They are the moon that shines at night, Saturn the sullen, the sun that is glad, Venus the fertile, Mars the bold, Mercury the swift-winged, and Jupiter the author of all births. Men belong to those same stars, as we have Moon, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, Saturn, Sun, and Mercury. Saturn represents tears, Jupiter represents birth. Mercury represents speech. Mars represents anger. Venus represents desire. And the Sun represents laughter. The rotation, revolution, and precession cycles of celestial bodies define Earth's day, year, and epoch. In modern astronomy, These three celestial motions are recognized as essential qualities of cyclic time, but they were also ancient criteria for determining the ability of one living system to influence another. Rotation correlates to energy, revolution to vibration, and precession to consciousness at the organic level. Jehudi manifests the archetypical powers that influence the physical world through the 7 planetary rays following these 3 cycles. The sacred astronomical function of 3 is also embedded in Jehudi. The Moon is the first planet on the Hermetic scale to begin the revolutionary cycle of 27.33 days, as it is concerned with extraordinary life or the realm of appearances. Mercury follows with 87.9 days, followed by Venus with 224.7 days. The Sun occupies the center of the scale, 365 days, followed by Mars, 1.8 years, Jupiter, 11.8 years, and Saturn, 29.4 years. Tables of planetary motion from ancient epochs indicate that the cyclic frequency of these bodies was known in sacred astronomy and tallied regularly. It is found in the Chaldean oracles, Pythagorean harmony of the spheres, and Kepler's laws to follow the Hermetic scale. It represents more than the relative speeds of the traditional 7 planets as a symbol system. Each aspect of nature is guided by cycles and rhythms in the Hermetic scale. The ancient astronomers were misunderstood in the modern era to identify more than 7 heavenly bodies based on their symbolism. 7 planetary rhythms are connected with the entire spectrum of life in the Hermetic system. The 7 organic functions are the most significant because they describe the physical alchemy innate in the human form. The ancients viewed these functions as the human equivalent to the transformative powers of the Neteru, the microcosm reflecting the macrocosm. Schwaller de Lubitz noted in a unique commentary on this system that each of the 7 organic functions has 4 physical organs that discharge it. There are 28 activities in the process, the vital number of organic life, and the number of days in a lunar cycle. Digestion begins with the mouth, stomach, small and large intestines. Selection is carried out by the small and large intestines, the liver, and the kidneys. It is excreted through the large intestine, the bladder, the lungs, and the skin. Small intestines, livers, lungs, and kidneys are used in individualization, internal assimilation. According to the ancients, the small intestine, kidneys, spleen, and genitals are responsible for the higher function of organic creation generation. The liver, spleen, lungs, and bone marrow transform the blood in the body. The bone marrow, pituitary, thyroids, and adrenal glands convert blood into energy. At first glance, these associations might seem irrelevant to spiritual development. In practicing the sacred science, these very physical mechanisms manifest within the carnal body can be tuned up to a higher frequency, enabling the aspirant to assimilate, generate, or transform subtler cosmic nutrients into spiritual force and divinize the mortal body. In addition to providing insight into the occult development of the human senses, this Hermetic table of correspondences also reveals the age cycles of influence connected with planetary rays. During infancy, lunar nourishment dominates the human experience when the moon is associated with memory. Biological conformity to natural rhythms is the focus to ensure survival. According to the table, There are 10 levels of Hermetic initiation, which correspond to the natural progression of spiritual development, as manifested in the traditional arts, sciences, and occult practices. The physical form is developed to the maximum. The Mercury level refines the Ethrog form. Many manifestations of the septenary Hermetic table of correspondences components are recorded in many works derived from the Hermetic body, or expressed as Hermetic in spirit. It provides much insight into the teachings and activities of ancient arcane schools, which were revived in our time by European secret societies that sought to restore the ancient mysteries. It has been used extensively by groups such as the Golden Dawn, Rosicrucian, and Theosophical movements, and Masonic offshoots in this way, but often without regard to the objectives of sacred science itself. The modern systems never fully articulated the idea of innate consciousness, awakening and using it, and the transformation that follows. Ceremonial rituals. It claims to be Egyptian or Hermetic, but combines several esoteric systems from several cultures. To communicate spiritual concepts, they rely universally on the association device. Hermetic philosophy relies solely on the principle that material and immaterial forces are mirrored in each other. There are misconceptions associated with both approaches. As a result of a philosophical misunderstanding of universal causes, the doctrine of association is often misapplied. In astrology, erroneous effects are attributed to planets or prescribed improper natural remedies. Similarly, the noble Hermetic premise of as above, so below is sometimes summarized as a fated circumstance of life, diverting the student from the wisdom of self-determination espoused by the ancient philosophers to understand more deeply work in harmony with creation. Grecian thought of the universe consisting of 5 primeval elements: fire, earth, air, water, and quintessence, literally the 5th property or element. Only the 4 physical elements are mentioned explicitly in the Corpus Hermetic. By combining all 4 elements in proportion, a creature becomes ardent in action, light in movement, and solid in structure. Because the earthly element gives the body its solidity, the water element makes it swell and unite with things. The air element moves us, and all of these elements are acted upon by the fire within us. It may be confusing to associate the planetary scheme of the Hermetic system with the elemental system, which represents the powers that descended into the physical realm and therefore emphasizes ascending, transformative processes. As a result, the ceremonial scale can be regarded as an integral tool in the practice of ceremonial magic. The elements of the cosmos are illustrated in Hellenistic forms as fire, earth, air, and water. The Egyptians used a similar quaternary in their formal protocol, especially in the temple and funerary rites, though it is a remnant of Greco-Roman magical thought. It is believed that the 4 principles were personified as neteru, polarized forces aligned around concrete structures, such as the corners of temples, tombs, and sarcophaguses. In Greek cosmology, Aristotle's 5th element was known as ether. In Hindu cosmology, it was akasha. Egypt's 5th principle, which enters the quadrilateral, is usually the figure the other 4 emanated and presided over their activities. Heru, the earthly sun, enhances the powers of the 4 organs of the human body through the activities of his 4 sons, Imset, Damutef, Quebensuf, and Hapi. Ra, the celestial sun, governs over the cosmic activities of Shu, Tefnut, Nut, and Geb. Astrology and symbolism are often hybrid fabrications of esoteric traditions, but quaternary symbolism, which dates back to antiquity, may provide answers. In Far Eastern meditation, the mandala has been a device to focus on psychic energy, consisting of a four-pointed graphic figure. Psychology today recognizes the importance of the quaternary figure as a stabilizing figure for the psyche. The quaternary is an essential component of ceremonial magic practice today. A typical spiritual practice includes consecration of the four quarters of ritual space, invocation of the four elemental forces, and the fourfold process of invocation, manifestation, communion, and dispersal. In the ceremonial table of elements, a set of correspondences that embodies the Hermetic Platonic concept of the five physical realms, it is stated that all physical manifestation is patterned after the quaternary. Human beings are affected by the five elemental powers primarily through the scale. Today, esotericism is far removed from the natural simplicity of the sacred science, emphasizing the complex associations of the seven planets and the five elements rather than the blueprint from which they were derived. It is common for Egyptian symbolism to obscure a body of knowledge derived from diverse notions of Hermetic scholarship that were taught through the ages, much of which is valid when viewed through the lens of its original, non-Egyptian sources. The entire disclosure of Egyptian esotericism remains unrevealed, but a substantial amount of original material is available for study. As the sacred science is further explored, we will examine much of the material derived from temples and tombs. As the Greeks knew Hathor, Hether was the goddess of love, music, and dance, a mirror image of Aphrodite, the goddess of amorous affairs in ancient Greece. Her cult was involved with the usual round of hedonistic practices, from drunken bacchanalias to animal sacrifices, and was especially vilified by critics who despised the veneration of women. The Israelites even worshipped Hathor's image as a golden calf, and their veneration of her sacred mysteries was viewed as an example of the degenerate nature of Egyptian religion by some. Neter's religion was infused with astronomical science, restorative healing practices, and funerary observances, all of which spoke to the deepest concerns of Egyptian society, birth and death. From conception to sexual awakening through physical dissolution, the Egyptian Hether represented fundamental metaphysical principles at work in the human sphere. She is described in thousands of prayers and vignettes addressed to her as Eye of Ra, Mistress of the East, and Lady of Manu, a few of the epithets illustrating her complex nature. One of the most fascinating and controversial focal points for those studying ancient Egypt has probably been the wide range of deities, associations, and functions. The gods of Greece and Rome were often associated with the Egyptian Neteru by foreign visitors in Greco-Roman times, and much of the literature of the time referred to those deities interchangeably with similar ones from neighboring cultures. For example, Jehudi and Heru were equated with Hermes and Apollo. Observers outside Egypt were thus restricted to interpreting Egyptian cosmology in terms of their spiritual and metaphysical understandings. This persists even today, where we analogize the cosmic functions of the Neteru with the narrow monotheism of Western religions, limiting our perception of these deities and the natural philosophy they embody. Due to this tendency, there has been a great deal of confusion about Egypt's religious worldview. The book promoted an amalgam of scholarly opinions that saw the Egyptians as a religiously fickle, gullible people, easily manipulated by clergy that invented gods and cults when it suited them. According to the planetary rays on the non-physical levels, the mastery of spiritual planes is also delineated.